All right, welcome back, Doug Badger Radio, with our author guest, Sharon Baker, who's written a book called Raising Hell. Sharon, I just couldn't resist pulling up the Trooper Raise a Little Hell 1980s rock anthem.
That was great.
For the book. Have you heard it before? Are you familiar with that song? And know was it running through your head as you were writing the book?
No, it didn't run through my head, but now I'm going to have to go replay it.
Yeah, now you're going to, and now you have it. So Sharon has written a book called Raising Hell, Rethinking Everything You've Been Taught About God's Wrath and God's Judgment. We're going to give this book to the caller number 3 over here at the studio lines. You can give us a call at 952-946-6205. Caller number 3, you're going to get your hands on the book. And only 3 because it just seems, like it'd be better not to give it to the first person. I don't know
why.
I never know how people make these decisions.
And you want to make Ian work a little bit, huh?
Yeah. So now somebody's thinking, well, I'm not going to call right now because I don't want to be caller number 1.
Right.
And, well, it's probably too late. So go ahead and give us a call. Caller number 3 at 952-946-6205. And we will send this book off to you because I think you should read it and share the story. Now Sharon, you take a tack in the book that I like a lot where you actually refer to 2 different kinds of justice. A retributive justice and a restorative justice. One where God is sort of bringing about retribution and judgment and pain on someone. And the other where God makes things the way that it ought to be, the way things should be, the way that the world ought to be if things were right and fixed in the world. And you're making a really good point that the kind of story that we see in the Bible, in the Old Testament, New Testament, is one where God is recreating all things, not where God is just sort of getting punishment out of God's system.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that. What's the picture that you paint in the book about how we should think about this? If the old way of an angry God who sort of, is bringing about pain and suffering on people is not the story we should be telling, what is the story that we should tell?
Well, I think the story we should tell is really getting back to the good news. And the good news is that God's justice is restorative. And when you look at justice in the Bible, and I did a search all the way through all the different concepts of justice, you see that the justice that comes from God is anti-violent. In fact, the Bible in Isaiah tells us where there's violence, there is no justice. It's reconciling. It's like fresh water washing over a dry land. It satisfies God. It's righteous, it's merciful, it takes care of widows and orphans and those who are abused, and it's the kind of justice that forgives. And so if we're going to rethink justice, which is what I'm asking my readers to do, is think of justice as restorative rather than retributive, we've got to rethink our typical theories of forgiveness as well. And so when you think about justice in our civil law system, and we always try to make the punishment fit the crime.
Yes, right. Like somehow if someone's properly punished, that does some good.
Right. And so, and I'm not saying we don't need to have, penal system or whatever to live in this imperfect world that we're in, but is eternal punishment for temporal sin a punishment that fits the crime? And I would say no, it's not. And how can we think that would be just if we try so hard for our punishments to fit the crime? How can we think that God would be any more unjust by making someone suffer forever and ever and ever and ever for a temporal sin?
Yeah.
And so I want to take justice and love and harmonize them, and instead of keeping them in tension, like I think we have interpreted the Bible to do.
Yeah, because a lot of people hear this story that, like, okay, in the what we call as Christians, what often is referred to as the Old Testament, Jews call it just the Bible.
Right.
And so in the Old Testament, you have kind of the God of wrath, and in the New Testament, you have the God of love. This kind of false picture. And I think you're saying, no, that's really not a way to think about it. What you have all along is that God is about making and remaking the world the way that it ought to be, and that is true now and true in the evermore. And this is what I hear a lot of people pushing back on when people like me or you try to raise a different way of thinking about afterlife and hell and heaven. I mean, because heaven gets implicated in this thing too, right? I mean,
it does, yeah.
The whole story gets implicated in this. But what a lot of people say is, well, are you suggesting that there is no judgment, or that there is no caring, or that there is no, that like God's just sort of groovy with everything and doesn't really care about any of it, right?
Yeah.
And they're
a
saying
feel-good God,
a feel-good God, and they're like, but there's just some things in this world that are so broken, and And so when they're told, like, look, there is no hell, right? If you do that kind of statement, then people are like, well, then what? God doesn't care? And people kind of intuitively, at least people who've been taught in the Jewish Christian traditions, want God to care. And so having God that doesn't do anything about injustice seems wrong. But I think what you're arguing, which is so helpful in the book, is, well, then let's have God actually do something that's of some good, and punishing someone through all of eternity for bad mistakes. That doesn't even seem to connect with making anything better. Like,
that's right.
Why? To whose benefit does that go?
That's right.
Yeah.
I think the good news is that God truly does recreate, and recreate in a way that's restorative and reconciling, and love-filled. So I'd prefer to interpret the Bible that way, which I think is what I call Jesus lens. I interpret it through Jesus. If Jesus is the full revelation of God to us, then we would need to interpret God through that lens.
And you know what, when people, and I do this all the time too, I say, you know, what I want to do is I want to view the lens, I want to view the Bible through that lens and through that understanding. I know for a lot of people, they're like, well, you know what, I wish I had that choice. I don't have that choice. I don't get to decide how I understand the Bible. I just have to take the Bible for as it is.
But everybody does decide.
Even if people think I'm just taking it as it is, it says it, I believe it, that settles it. They're not actually doing that, right?
No, everyone has a canon within a canon. They take certain parts and privilege those parts, whether they're aware of it or not. And I just want to make us aware of that.
Yeah.
And I'm doing that, but at least I'm honest about it, right?
You mean you're doing that by saying, I have a certain way that I look at this, and I want to tell you what that is as I'm reading it and as I'm doing it. Yeah. And I think that's so helpful. Well, Sue in Edina is our winner of the book. So, Sue, we have your address, and we're going to send it to you, and we hope that you enjoy it. Now, here's what you can't do, right? This is what isn't very useful. In 2 little short radio interviews, there's not enough to get into all the context of this book. So people could buy the book, Raising Hell, it's called. Sharon Baker is the author. She is a theology and religion professor. So you can find her online. You can find the book on Amazon and at your bookstores and all those kinds of places. But then there's also some other conversations that are going on online and in meetings around the country. Is that right, Sharon? Are you traveling anywhere? Or are you going to be anywhere doing presentations on the book?
I will be off and on. I don't have anything coming up in the next few months. So.
Great. Well, let's make that. Let's make that happen. Sharon Baker is the author. This book is called Raising Hell: Rethinking Everything You've Been Taught About God's Wrath and Judgment. And she is a Christian theology professor and a Christian religion professor. And so she says, let's let the Bible speak and say what it has to say. And for many, they will be pleasantly surprised that the story might be something different than we've been hearing all along. Sharon, sure appreciate having you on the show, and appreciate your book. Now, if you know the way the show works, we're going to be joined by natural health coach Shelley Pagitt. So we move from talking about, eternal life to colon health. seems to be a little bit of everything around here. Well, Sharon, thanks so much for the book. Thanks for being on the show. We're going to be back with natural health coach Shelley Pagitt here on AM 950, the voice of Minnesota on Doug Pagitt Radio. You can find all this over at DougPagittRadio.com.